Greetings, true believers, and welcome to another episode of Dan Dashley Discusses, the weekly comic book review where I take a book, analyze it, give it a good once through, and then tell you if it's worth a buy, borrow, or skip. For those of you out there paying attention who are wondering why I didn't do a video last week, even though I had said I was getting back on a regular schedule, that's because I decided to do a couple drunken comic book reviews that week, and I've decided that they're not going to see the light of day. That's the long and short of it. I did them. They were fun. I think they're hilarious. But they're not gonna be surfaced for a while at least. So that's where that went. To make it up for you, we're getting back on a normal, regular, non-drunken schedule. I mean, no promises on the non-drunken part, but a normal schedule will resume. And let me tell you, this week I've got something extra special for you, a book by one of my all-time favorite comic book writers. I'm talking, of course, about Plutona by Jeff Lemire and Emi Lenox. Jeff Lemire, for those of you unaware with his genius body of work, is the man behind The Nobody, Underwater Welder, Essex County, Sweet Tooth, The Descender, Frankenstein Agents of Shade, Green Arrow, an amazing Hawkeye run currently going,
One eternity later,
Lost Dogs, and now Plutona. I could go on and on and on, listing amazing comics that Jeff Lemire has really sunk his hands into and crafted into something absolutely spectacular. Emi Lenox, with those of you unfamiliar with her, did an amazing variant cover for Burn the Orphanage. She had a short little mini as part of Glory, and she did her own critically acclaimed Emitown, sort of an autobiographical comic diary of just her sort of thoughts spilling out on the page. It's lovely. If you haven't read it, go do so now. So going into Plutona, we've got this amazing combination of a brilliant writer who's also a brilliant artist, teaming up with a brilliant artist who's also a brilliant writer. Lemire and Lenox are just a combo that's absolutely prepared to bring you an amazing comic book, and I think Plutona has lived up to those expectations. But, you know, I can't just leave it at that, saying both of these guys are great. Ergo, anything they touch is going to be great as well. I need to sort of frame it a little bit. Plutona is the tale of 5 kids living in this suburb outside of Metro City. Your sort of typical superhero sprawling cityscape full of just dastardly men and violent gangsters and superheroes coming out of just every corner. But if you think Plutona is just going to be Lemire writing another superhero book, you're dead wrong. This book sort of tries its best to stay away from the idea of a typical teenage superhero book. Those have been done before. I think Lemire and Lenox know it, and I think that's not what they're trying to do here. These kids are each sort of dealing with their own angst of just sort of growing up and where they're growing up. Lemire has time and again written about these sort of formative years in his character's life, whether it be becoming a father in Underwater Welder, or sort of the ennui of growing up in a small town in Essex County, to even what separates man from machine in The Descender, and, you know, what makes a man, period, in Frankenstein Agents of Shade. So Lemire is again dipping back into that oh-so-familiar well that we know he feels comfortable in with Plutona. These kids are sort of coming to grips with who they are, where they fit into with the world. Whether it be Teddy, the first kid that we're introduced to, who spends a good majority of his time listening to the radio and talking online about superhero sightings in the city, sort of having this sense of escapism that a lot of people attribute to comic books in general, but it's his real life. To Diane, this girl who always has a skull neckerchief around and has this brand new puppy called Loki and made a sort of studded leather jacket. Yet at the same time is a clearly loving mother who's falling prey to these sort of maybe it's fashionable to be angsty ideas that a lot of people have in high school. This character Ray, who's dealing with an obviously abusive father and sort of having to deal with the fact that he's almost all alone. He's angry about these situations that are outside of his control. To the last of the main characters, Mai, who's kind of fed up with dealing with her baby brother and these sort of familial commitments that come with her mother being sort of away at work and sort of just her family coming together as a whole. She's clearly got issues with those. And last but not least, her baby brother, who's invested totally in his video games. As, you know, I can relate a lot to that as a youth. I mean, that just sort of happens for a lot of kids. Each of these kids is dealing with their own unique individual issues that are not only believable, which is something that I think Lemire is amazing at, and Lenox as well, at sort of crafting these situations that aren't just sort of plucked out of the ether. These are real things that happen to real kids, real people in real life, and that makes it more interesting to read about. So not only are these situations real and believable, they're also situations that maybe don't come up all at once in a comic book. You might read about a kid who's obsessed with superheroes, or a kid who's sort of dealing with an abusive parent in a lot of comic books, but nothing that sort of comes together from all angles and explains how these characters would interact with other children dealing with these same issues. It's really sort of a comic book petri dish that Lemire and Lenox have cooked up, saying, what if all of these kids in comic books that we see all the time, who are also real people, were interacting with each other? We don't get to see that all the time. And that's one point of difference between Plutona and a lot of other books about just generic teens dealing with generic teen issues. And these characters, while different, do interact all the time. You know, Diana and Mai are sort of best friends, going as far as Diana lending her coat and Mai taking it and sort of almost taking advantage a little bit in a way that, you know, sometimes best friends can do without even thinking about it. That's a real sort of teenage, junior high situation. And I think Lemire and Lenox are using the situations because they've probably been through them themselves. Lord knows Lemire wrote Underwater Welder and knew what it was like to be a new father, to deal with those stresses. And so Lemire is clearly a man who writes about what he knows. And, you know, Lenox's biggest book is her sort of autobiographically talking about the thoughts pouring out of her head. So it's clear that these guys have sort of dealt with these situations or have been close to other people dealing with these situations enough so that they're believable, and these character interactions are just beautifully interwoven in a way that makes sense. You know, from Ray dealing with Teddy, sort of making fun of him for what I assume is a masturbation incident that maybe, you know, someone called Teddy out on masturbation. That's why Ray calls him Tugger all the time. Apparently no one's called him that since like 6th grade. So, you know, maybe he was a kid sort of experimenting with masturbation and then he probably got caught at like a slumber party or something. I mean, I'm not speaking from personal experience. I'm taking very good guesses as to what happened to Teddy. But, you know, Ray sort of making fun of him, and Teddy obviously being his only friend, even though Teddy maybe doesn't think they're friends. It's obvious that Ray needs Teddy, and I think that's a real situation for a lot of kids who play the bully, to, you know, make fun of their friends, but really they're the people that need those guys the most and wouldn't know what to do without those people there to make fun of and to be what they perceive as friendly from coming from an abusive home. It's clear that's all Ray knows, and that's what he's showing Teddy. And Teddy has obviously known enough to begrudgingly deal with it. Obviously he asks, you know, why is Ray such an asshole all the time? But I think deep down, Teddy knows the answer because he knows when to back off, as shown from this beautifully crafted moment where Teddy tells Ray to go home, and Ray says, "What if I don't want to?" This very real moment where we get to see that Ray obviously doesn't want to be home. We could only guess at it previously, but I mean, that was a moment that it was really real. That abusive father moment sort of came through, and Teddy knew how to deal with it, and Ray sort of silently appreciated what Teddy was doing. These are real characters doing things that real people would do. And that's what I think makes Plutona so different from a lot of books with teenagers, and a lot of books with teenagers sort of stumbling upon things bigger than themselves. It's difficult to write teenagers as an adult. I mean, clearly every comic book creator is probably an adult. I mean, there might be a couple outliers of 16 to 18-year-olds writing for professional companies. I mean, I don't know every writer under the sun. But as an adult, it's hard to look back on those teenage times and sort of realize the things that you did and what, you know, was really affecting you. Lemire and Lenox managed to capture that in a way that sort of makes this book on a level very relatable and real. I keep saying that word, and that's, you know, that's because that's the best way to describe Plutona. Sure, they exist in a world with superheroes, and they exist in a world where, you know, every parent seems to be absentee, but I think that's all sort of cursory. You know, this is a book just about teenagers being teenagers, and like a lot of Lemire's work, it's a book about why humans are the way that they are. And while I'm probably making Plutona sound like a super heavy book, it really isn't. Despite all these individual moments that when you pick them apart, they have this sort of depth and weight to them where you're like, wow, this book is depressing. That's only when you view them in the vacuum of themselves. There's plenty of lighthearted, funny moments in this book. You know, moments caused by relating to being super bored in school. And you know, that sort of relatable feeling where you make fun of your friends, where you understand how it goes. Those moments sort of balance out these dark, deep moments that are really going on with these kids' lives and create something refreshingly in the middle. A lot of books go too far one way or too far the other, and that's great. Books are allowed to do that. But sometimes it's nice to meet in the middle in an area where everyone can kind of understand what's going on. And what's extra amazing is that even with all these really real moments of them experiencing life as real people, at the end of the book, these kids wander into the woods after Mai's brother gets lost, and they stumble upon the corpse of a superhero, still in full superhero garb. And it's, you know, one of the most famous and most powerful, Plutona, a character that's described already as enigmatic, sort of mysterious, not showing up that much. And boom, these kids stumble upon her dead? What's that about? It's that sort of jarring moment where the realism of the book sort of parts ways, and you're reminded, oh, this is a book about superheroes. You know, at its core, there are superheroes in this book. It doesn't have to take place on this Earth that I live in. There are superheroes in this book. And that might seem like kind of a jarring moment, and it is a little bit, but I think Lemire and Lenox do a good job of reminding us in little chunks that, hey, there's superheroes going on. Usually that comes in, you know, the form of Teddy talking about these superheroes. But in the back of your mind, you're always sort of like, yeah, they're superheroes. I mean, I accept that. And then this happens, and you're like, oh, I remember that thing I was thinking this entire time. Where are the superheroes? And then boom, that's where they are. I'm not going to say that the writing in this book is flawless. As much as I adore Lemire's work and think Lenox is amazing in her own way too, every book has its flaws. There might be a couple times where I thought, you know, maybe Diane should have called out Mai on being sort of a crappy friend. I remember those situations, and I've been on both sides of someone sort of taking your stuff, not returning it when they're supposed to. Who hasn't been in those situations? And, you know, sometimes you call them out, sometimes you don't. I remember a couple times where I thought, you know, these are problems that could be solved by talking them out. And, you know, sometimes that can get a little frustrating when you, as the outside reader, realize what they should do because, you know, you've reached that grown-up mental state, but you just sort of have to keep reminding yourself that these are children that we're talking about. I mean, they're probably no older than 14, so you have to sort of keep in that mindset. And I will say cliches like sort of naming the superhero city Metro City, you know, maybe that's a little too heavy-handed. Jeff Lemire's a guy that sort of knows his way around subtlety, so when you name a city Metro City, it's sort of too on point, I feel, for a guy like him. These are small flaws, though. These aren't anything that would make you drop the book. If you're picking up Plutona and dropping it on, like, the second page where they say that the big city is Metro City, I don't think that this is a book for you anyway. Alright, so on to the art. Lenox is the primary artist on this book, which a part of me is a little disappointed. I like Lenox's art. She does cute really well. She knows how to craft people in this sort of huggable, approachable way that I think really sort of is a great duality. I think is really sort of a great duality and sort of the darker themes in part of this book. But I'm a huge fan of Lemire's art, so I want those thick, black, gluey lines that he's just sort of plucks out of what I assume is some sort of intergalactic squid's ink pouch, and he just goes all over the page and then crafts the whites with his finger. I want those dirty, gritty sort of art pieces, and I am really disappointed that we don't get that. At the same time, though, I'm not going to complain about Lenox art. What are you, crazy? I'm going to complain about adorable art that manages to look appealing? No. And Lenox sort of manages to make these kids look like kids in the context of the adults that they're by. They aren't, you know, towering over the adults or as near height as some artists like to do. They aren't tiny little babies. I mean, these are clearly teenagers. That's a hard thing to really get right, I feel, sometimes. A lot of artists go one extreme or the other with kids. They make them either adults or babies. Lenox knows how to craft teenagers because she's done it before. I mean, this isn't her first rodeo with drawing teenagers. And as someone that knows what medium-sized high schools look like, she's perfectly encapsulated the look at the clocks of the desk of the track. It all looks like it should. That's something that really added to the atmosphere of the book. I wasn't like, you know, oh, these kids are doing in Metro City High School when they're clearly in the suburbs. It looked like a suburban high school. That seems like a minor thing, but it really added to the tone of the book. It was one of my favorite parts. And she manages to make every character in this book identifiable. They have a strong profile. Diane is sort of healthier. Teddy's a little scrawny. Ray's obviously kind of taller for his age. Clearly he's been in a scrap or two. And then Mai is sort of this petite little girl, sort of in a direct duality with her best friend Diane. And these might seem like unimportant things, but it really adds a lot to their character when you can say, I can see just by looking at this character what they've been through, what they're all about, what's shaping their personality. That's how you do character design. Characters have strong profiles, and I know what's up with them as soon as I see them. I mean, obviously I want to have some mystery, but Lenox manages to tell us without even telling us. She shows us. That's brilliant. And a big shout out to Jordi Belair, who's crafted some beautiful colors. Skin colors are soft, believable. The moments that are supposed to have crazy colors, like Plutona's costume when they find her dead, those are just absolutely vibrant. And the book opens with this view of flies on Plutona's corpse, which, you know, spoiler alert, she died. And those have these sunken in sort of blues and grays that paint this picture of just something is wrong right now. And Lenox's art does a beautiful job accompanying Belair. It's a perfect art combo because, you know, Lemire and Lenox know how to write to make the art beautiful. Having such experienced writers and artists on this book clearly has paid off in that the art isn't muddling the message. The art is part of the message, and that's how it should be. From the second page, where we open up with this beautiful double spread of this small suburban city encapsulated by forest, so that we know what's happening in their world, where our setting is. That's an important thing, and Lenox captures it beautifully. And you can say what you want about Lenox's sort of simplistic art style with pointed toes and nice round features for a lot of the characters and sort of really flat coloring from Belair. I think it all adds to Lemire and Lenox's message in this sort of simplistic environment with deeper stuff happening. I will say at first I thought maybe Lenox wasn't doing anything impressive with the paneling. Then I went back, my third or fourth read, and realized the duality that she created in a lot of the pages. Each of the four main characters is introduced with their own page telling what's going on with them and their parents. It wasn't until my third or fourth read that I got that, hey, the first two kids are introduced with the exact same close-up of their face, and even the same paneling structure, and sort of mirroring what's going on with their sort of supportive parents and them sort of not fully accepting that parental support. And then I saw Ray and Mai's pages, both opening up with the same sort of most of their headshot, and very similar panel layouts as well, mirroring the fact that Mai just thinks her mom's being abusive and forcing her to watch her brother and just being generally angsty about what's going on with her parents that doesn't really matter, while Ray is dealing with some deep, deep shit from an actually abusive parent, sort of mirroring the way that they think, you know, my life sucks. Small paneling details like that you might miss on your first or even second read through, but trust me when I say Lenox is doing her damnedest to make the paneling of this book deep, meaningful, and interesting. Also, bonus, at the end of this book, we see what Plutona did before she died. It's part one, so I'm expecting lots of little mini comics at the back of each issue, which is interesting because I want to know what happened to Plutona. And we sort of see that she's working 2 shifts and has a second job to support her child. It's clear that she's a single mother. She leaves her kid with her mom, and she's not very happy about it. This sort of plays back to the beginning of the book, where we have these messages about parenting. And I think part of this book is about how parents shape their children. We've got Ray's abusive father. We've got Teddy's sort of absentee, works too much dad. We've got Mai's mom, who works very hard and leaves her with her brother. And we've got Diane's clearly very supportive, maybe even doting mom, and how each of these characters is going to turn out because of their parents. That's another callback. That's another even more duality at the end of this book with Plutona's story to what's going on with these kids. Plutona, as it stands right now, is such an interconnected work. Every part speaks to one another in such a way to craft a beautiful experience from the first page to the last. So, factoring in the writing and the art as a complete package, what do I think? I think Plutona is a beautiful work where the writing and the art feed into one another, grow each other, and really tell the story separately and individually. Plutona is an exemplary work that really speaks volumes about the talent of every individual involved. There's no moment where the writing betrays the art, or the art betrays the writing. They feed into each other. They further the story. In case you're not picking up what I'm laying down here, I give Plutona a buy it on every level across the board. You're going to want to buy the floppies of this. You're going to want to buy the trade of this. It's all going to come together in a way that I feel is going to further the vision of these two artists. It's going to add even more credibility to Lemire and Lenox, and it's going to be something that you're going to want to be a part of. Don't miss out on the first issue of a great new series just because you don't know. You know, people might say this or that about Lenox's art. People will complain that it's too simple, too scratchy at some points. Maybe they don't like the way that she does characters' noses or faces or bodies, or they might not like the fact that Lemire always goes so deep on his books. I've heard people say that he's a writer incapable of just having a good time with the medium. You might be skeptical about buying a book with these people's name on it because of these things that you hear. I'm telling you right now, right here, Plutona is going to be a book that you're going to want to be a part of. Go out, Buy it. Plutona #1 on shelves today. It's shaping up to be an amazing journey. I'm so excited to see where they go next. So that's actually all we have time for this week, True Believers. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, follow us on all our social media. Watch the videos below me. I added a couple of those, some clickables, a subscribe button, which should be over here. And, you know, just do all the normal YouTube things. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr. I have it all in the description below. You shouldn't get lost. If you like this, let me know what you thought. Do you think Plutona's worth it? Buy it, borrow it, skip it? What do you want me to talk about next? I've got a couple things in mind, so, you know, if you thought something different than I thought, let me know. I'm always interested to see what you guys think. You know, talking about comics is always fun for me, even if people don't always match up with what I'm saying. So you guys, thanks for watching, and I will see you next week, True Believers.
But I just have to